Anything from Philip or anybody else? Alicia? Okay. And have any notice been received from member to delegate authority to another member?
Nope.
Okay. Declaration of...
Matthew, you are that. Matthew, is that for voting rights?
Yes.
Yes, Matthew.
Okay, you can.
Sorry, Chair. Matthew would need to let me know. He hasn't done that, so he has to just drop me a text, and that will do if you text him.
Okay.
Okay. Declaration of interest. Any members, any financial or other interests to declare? Nope. Okay. Moving on to item number 3, chairperson's business, accelerated passage. I met with the Minister yesterday, 2 o'clock, to talk about this piece of legislation that the Minister is quite keen for us to get through. An accelerated passage for a non-domestic rates coronavirus valuation bill. The Minister invited me and Peter to an informal meeting on Tuesday the 19th to discuss the need for accelerated passage for legislation relating to Reval 2023. The bill is called the Non-Domestic Rates Coronavirus Valuation Bill. It's a short piece of legislation which replicates measures that are going through Westminster and the Scottish Parliament at the moment. As members are aware, non-domestic revaluation is underway. The antecedent valuation date for the revaluation has been set in legislation as the 1st of October 2021. Legal advice to the Department in respect of Article 39A of the Rates Northern Ireland Order in 1977 appears to indicate that businesses could challenge their valuations on the basis of their compliance with coronavirus restrictions. Indeed, it is understood there has been a significant number of such challenges in England, and the Department believes that if the 4,000 or so of such anticipated challenges in Northern Ireland were successful, around about 255 million would be lost in business rates revenue. The Department is to bring forward a short bill which will mean that no account will be taken of any matter which is attributed directly or indirectly to the coronavirus in respect of the non-domestic rates revaluation. The Minister is to seek the Assembly's approval for accelerated passage of the bill. The Executive is to consider this matter tomorrow. Do we know if it's gone on? We won't know if it's on the agenda until it's there. Okay. The bill is expected to be accompanied by a Barnett consequential of around £50 million, which the Minister is expected to suggest should be ring-fenced by a future Executive to provide non-domestic rates relief for some business. I'm sorry, members, this is quite a lot. This is quite a complicated issue that has been brought before us, and I say we've only had fairly short notice before we were able to bring this to as well. I think we probably need a fairly detailed and comprehensive briefing on this, and I think the first opportunity we would have that would be on the 3rd of November.
Yep.
Jim. Members, any comments?
Yeah, just Chair, you refer to your compliance with coronavirus restrictions. Well, we know what that means, but what does that mean with regard to rates? You know,
I think that's
any more detail than that, or is that?
I think that's probably my understanding. Is there's a piece of legislation that's going through Westminster at the moment, and also through the Scottish Parliament, and the reason it's doing that is because even though there were rates relief given to companies during the sort of coronavirus, there is an opportunity for them, because one of the things they could potentially say that we need further relief from is due to the fact of loss of business because of COVID. And one of the reasons that has been put down is sort of coronavirus. Okay. So it's my understanding, because it is a considerable amount of money that is already likely to go through to the Lands Tribunal in England. This is a piece of legislation that's been put across all across areas of the United Kingdom. That is about as far as the detail I've had from it. I asked to get information on the Westminster Bill and also on the Scottish Bill as well. I haven't quite, we've just had information that's come through in the Westminster Bill. We haven't had the Scottish Bill, but I'm more than happy to, I think we should circulate that amongst members so you can read this. I think I will be I need to have the full briefing on the 3rd of November to sort of come to this, because I'm still trying to grapple with the implications of this. So apologies to members of the committee about this, but it came to us literally yesterday. I think we need to have that opportunity to sort of consider it and look at it in detail. So are we content to schedule a departmental briefing on the 3rd of November?
Yep.
Great.
Okay, great. Sorry, Jim, go ahead.
So just trying to follow what's afoot, but it sounds as if the executive wished to remove a facility which business currently has to raise a relevant consideration as to the scale of their rates. They want to remove that option. So it's pretty much an anti-business move, is it not?
Look, I think that's why we probably need to have the briefing and to get some more understanding of precisely what's been proposed. That to me was the initial reading I had of it, but having read the Westminster preamble and the bits and pieces of the bills that were coming through there, I need to have more information of it, and I think that's something that we need to consider closely as a committee.
Okay, let's hear from them.
Okay. And are we happy for the 3rd of November, team? Okay, thanks very much indeed. Agreed. I'll move on to the next item of the agenda, Fiscal Council, Fiscal Commission. The Executive's draft 2025 budget, which may be published in mid-November. The Fiscal Council is expected to produce a report on it 1 month later. In addition to the formal public committee briefings, is the committee content for me and the Deputy Chairperson to meet informally with the Fiscal Council around the time of the publication of its report, so we can get an overview of it, so we can be better informed within the committee? Are we agreed? Agreed. Thank you. The Fiscal Commission is expected to publish its interim report in December on enhancing tax varying powers for Northern Ireland. In addition to the formal public committee briefings, is the committee content for me and the Deputy Chairperson to meet informally with the Fiscal Commission around the time of the publication of its report? And I think for a similar sort of thing, so we're better informed going forward. Are we content?
Yep.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Next item, draft minutes of proceedings. The draft minutes of the Finance Committee meeting on the 13th of October 21 are at page 8. Are members content that the draft minutes of the 13th of October meeting are an accurate record of proceedings? Are we agreed? Agreed. There are no matters arising. This is agreed. Okay. Moving on to the bulk of today's deliberations. Item number 6, financial reporting, departments and public bodies bill committee deliberations. The committee received evidence on the financial reporting bill and agreed to write to the department seeking its views on some possible amendments. The department has responded in writing. It is hoped the committee can use this session to decide its position on all possible amendments to the bill. The following tabled papers are relevant to this agenda item. A copy of the bill table, which is page 3 on tabled items. Department's latest response on the amendments is at page 16 of tabled papers. And a recent response from the FEHE colleges and VSNI on the bill are at page 21 of tabled papers. The other relevant papers are included in the meeting packs, include a clerk's briefing paper at page 15, a copy of the department's consequential NIPSO amendment at page 27, the Keeling schedule at page 29, the delegated powers memorandum at page 34, the Granny GRRA brackets NI Act 2001 at page 37, previous departmental responses at page 61, an NDP list at page 79, a copy of the financial reporting bill at page 98, an example of the estimates memorandum at page 115. I just remind you that this session has been reported by Hansard. Peter, do you want to talk up to the bill table?
First, members, just to advise that Matthew has delegated his vote to Mr. Catney. Again, apologies for the flurry of papers there. There's a ton of stuff. For those who are in the room, we've actually provided you with a hard copy of the bill table. So it's at page 3 of tabled items for those who are on Starleaf. And again, apologies for there being so much paper. But this sets out the clauses of the bill and the amendments that have been suggested. As the department has furnished a written response, it is suggested that the committee now steps through these possible amendments and informally agrees its position on each one of them. This is only informal, so I'm suggesting that no votes are needed at this time. If you can just give me an indication of where you are. When the committee comes to undertake formal clause-by-clause scrutiny, maybe on the 10th of November, it'll be time to vote then, if you so desire. So this is really just an informal. Give the clerk an idea of where you are and how you feel about the need to amend and the nature of the amendments that have been proposed, or if any other amendments are required that haven't been captured so far, Chairperson.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Any comments so far? Okay, we'll start off with, we'll proceed down the bill table. You all got your copies in front of you? Yep. Clause 1 amends the Government Resources Accounting and Clause 1 amends the Government Resources and Accountings Act Northern Ireland 2001 so-called Granny Act. This will allow the department to issue directions to other departments on the preparation of estimates. It also allows the department to designate certain bodies by making secondary legislation which will come to the Assembly under negative resolution procedure. The department is required to consult with Treasury in aspects of the designation of bodies. The estimates shall include information relating to the designated bodies, and the Northern Ireland Audit Office shall review all relevant financial transactions so as to ensure they're in accordance with any relevant authority. Members, are we content we understand Clause 1? Okay. Okay. A number of possible amendments have been suggested to this clause. These are numbered 1.1 to 1.6 and are shown in the bill table. I'll move on to Amendment 1.1, page 5 of the table papers. Following on from a suggestion by the Northern Ireland Fiscal Council that greater clarity was needed in respect of EU funding, net spending and income, also known as accruing resources, including things like district rates, which don't appear in the estimates. In order to address this and members' concerns that new arrangements for the presentation of accruing resources will lead to no loss of detail, and to also enhance the current reporting of information, a possible amendment is suggested. The possible amendment would revise subclause 8.2 of the Granny Act so that greater specificity would be provided in respect of the minute issued under the subclause and which relates to accruing resources in the estimate. The new wording would be, as and shall set out the source and quantity of all accruing resources and shall include particularly European Union funding, developer contributions, etc., and all such resources in excess of 100,000. The Department has provided its views which are shown on the table. It opposes the amendment in principle. Members care to make any comment? I would be supportive of the amendment. Jim?
I just wanted to know, the 100,000 threshold, where did that come from? Why is that the suggestion?
Chairperson, I've drafted the amendment. I made up a number. It could have been any number. So 100,000 I thought would certainly pick up the district rates, would generally pick up most of the European Union funding quanta as well, but you know, it could be another number. But to just advise members, the department informally advised me that that's actually quite a small number, and their position is that we should be careful what we wish for, because we could get quite a lot of detail there, which might be quite difficult to understand.
That's the point occurred to me, that 100,000 in these terms is quite small, but I'm not sure where the balance lies. But
I think it's, sorry, go ahead.
Just on the same point, Chair, the department's view, on this, I thought that if anything, it was directing the committee as well too, to the extent that where it's totally unnecessary maybe to have that amendment in there at this point in time.
It just seems strange that we have the Independent Fiscal Council that we have appointed to be able to ask for specific detail. The Independent Fiscal Council would wish this to be in. So it just seems to be, I think, bearing in mind what we want to be able to see is greater accountability and transparency, which is the sort of the whole basis behind the bill in the first place, and be able to understand. Here's the thing, Alicia, we're trying to be able to make a system of the accounts that are presented are much more readily understood and understandable. The Independent Fiscal Council, which we have appointed to investigate these things and make recommendations, has made this recommendation. It just seems quite strange to me that the Independent Fiscal Council, which we've asked to improve the process, has asked for this, yet the department has said they don't want it.
It's not that they're saying that they don't want it, they're saying that they don't think there's any need for it.
I think the difference between want and need is sort of a...
Well, I think there is a difference here, just in a sense, and that there isn't any need for it. In other words, it'd be like duplication in a sense. But to go on then to that final point, and already the clerk has acknowledged that it's nearly like a figure taken at random at the outset and so on. Whereas you can see just from the comment then again too by the department that they're effectively saying, hey, listen, you're going to create a whole lot of work for yourself here in terms of receipts and everything else. That again too, that where one would wonder why do we go down that road,
Any other views?
Chair, can I just say one other thing?
Yep.
I think the principal is right that, and I suspect the Fiscal Council has reason to ask for more detail. So I'm always a bit sceptical when a department tries to tell you, well, you don't really need that, it's not appropriate. You know, if the Fiscal Council are saying on one hand it would be a good idea and the department doesn't want to give it, well then it does raise some questions in my mind as to why they wouldn't want to give it. Though I am a wee bit pondering over the 100,000, but I don't know what the right figure would be.
So, just taking rather on, I'm taking Melicia's view, but from the sort of the other perspective, people are happy with the idea. It's just the figure that we have issue with, because we don't know what the quantum should be. Sorry, go ahead.
It's the figure, you know, no disrespect.
No.
It's where the figure came from. It's what, is that the right figure?
Yeah.
Could we not ask the Fiscal Council for a view on the figure?
Chairperson, we certainly can. We certainly can do that. I think also, Chair, what might I suggest is that maybe hold your position on 1.1 and then look at 1.3, which might be a neater way of doing something similar. Sorry.
Okay.
I think Philip's actually indicated.
Are we content?
I think, sorry, Chair, Philip's indicating.
Sorry. Hi, Philip.
It might indicated before, the clerk mentioned leaving it to 1.3. I mean, I think if we're going to ask the Fiscal Commission for a view in the figure, I mean, it would be useful to allow them to see the department's response as well, because, you know, that might have cleared things up.
Yeah, the Fiscal
And get
Council,
it-
not the Commission, the Fiscal Council.
Fiscal Council, sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry.
okay. Okay.
If you move on, so we'll hope the committee will kind of hold its position on this.
Yeah, I think we hold a position on that until we get further information.
Okay.
I think that's what we can send to that. Okay, next item, Amendment 1.2, page 5 to 6 of table papers. Following the comments made by Mr Astor last week in respect of the future budgets bill and whether that would include a limit on accruing resources, clarity was sought as to whether, in the absence of an accruing resources limit, a further tidying up amendment might be needed to the Planning Act in respect of Clause 8.1 in order to remove the reference to the limit of accruing resources in the Budget Act. The Department is responding, indicating that there will indeed be no limit on accruing resources.
Future budget acts, because it'll be voted on a net basis, so there won't be any limit anymore.
That there will indeed be no limit on accruing resources in future budget acts, and that a tidying up amendment is not required, as the Granny Act refers to any limit that might be set by a budget act. Jim, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I think what the department's saying is that since Section 8.1 of Granny says the department may, subject to any relevant limit set by a budget act, and if the budget act isn't setting any limit, then those words become meaningless. But the department seems to still want to keep them there. If they're no longer capable of speaking, if there's going to be no limits, then it's a bit tautologous just to keep them there. But which was the point I was making, that why are we retaining in Granny a reference to limits being set by budget acts when the budget acts aren't going to set any limits? No, it's not something I'm going to die in the ditch over. It just seemed to be unnecessary tidying up, but the department seems reluctant to tidy it up.
Okay. So are we content then not to pursue the suggested amendment then? Great. Moving on to Amendment 1.3, page 6 of the table paper, represents a more wide-ranging amendment which might remove the requirement in Clause 8.1 of the Granny Act for a minute relating to accruing resources and replace this with an estimates memorandum in line with Westminster, which would set out accruing resources in more detail. In other jurisdictions, most notably Westminster, estimates memorandum are produced in support of the estimates and supporting tables. An example of such a memorandum is at page 115 for information. The format of the memorandum would be agreed by an annual resolution of the Assembly. The wording suggests a particular level of granularity. The Department has provided its views, which are shown on the table, which shows it supports the principle of an estimates memo, but imposes an amendment. It also suggests that the committee shouldn't complete the minute with the memorandum. One of the things that I remember sort of my time was sort of working in Whitehall is that when any time that there was anything produced, it always came on a template, and it came in the form of a template which was a written description of what it was with the back of it with the financial details on it. And that was the process that was followed, and that allowed the sort of the audit trail and the sort of the granularities to be required as well. I think when we look at this, I think when the department says that it shows the principle of an estimates memo but proposes an amendment, I think this would probably putting in the amendment would clarify it indeed for other departments apart from the Department of Finance what they must do rather than what they would like to do. And I think subject to the views of the committee, I think it would be quite useful to make sure that that amendment should be in there. Any thoughts?
Chair, I think there is a correlation between 1.3 and 1.1. I think 1.3 is probably actually the better way of doing it, and I think something needs to be done. I would like, if we're going to go back to the Fiscal Council, to let them see what has been suggested at 1.1 and 1.3 and the departmental responses to each, and ask them if they any refined view on those matters.
Would we be content?
Not often I agree with Mr. Hallister, but on this occasion I do.
Very dangerous.
Very dangerous.
On a worrying trend.
I think we're agreed. Are we agreed?
He won't welcome the support either.
Jim, do you want
Always welcome comments, Sam.
Come on, Jim.
to change your mind, Jim?
Let's keep on. Focus.
So members, just to be clear then, so we'll write to the Fiscal Council
Yeah.
about 1.1 and 1.3 and see what they come back with. But if I'm sensing around the room correctly that you might be in mind possibly to support an estimates memorandum. So this is what they have in Westminster. Instead of page 115 of your pack, instead of the pages and pages of tables, you would have a wee bit of spiel, a wee bit of writing at the front of this memoranda that would explain to you what the numbers mean, and to help the department to make sure other departments played ball. You would then, that's why you need an amendment, rather than just relying on an MOU between committees and the departments. By putting into legislation, you're helping DOF, Department of Finance, to get other departments to play nicely with their committees. Okay.
Good. Thank you. Moving on to Amendment 1.4, page 8 of the table papers, is a cleverer version of 1.3, which removes all references to the memorandum in the minute and simply requires the estimates to be specified at a particular level of detail. I think we covered that.
Well, yeah, so Chairperson, this is a much better worded version which Claire came up with. What it basically does is, instead of introducing a new thing of a memoranda, it would actually specify in the estimates the level of information you've got. The reason you might not like that, I suppose, is the estimates are long enough as it is, that maybe it'd be handier to have like an individual memoranda for each department which goes to each committee, thus reducing the blizzard of paperwork a bit. And again, does the committee have a preference, Chairperson?
Thoughts?
Anything that makes it easier handier, I would be in support of. And that's all. That's probably all I would need anyhow.
Any other thoughts?
So, sure, but this does tie back very much to 1.3 as well.
Does.
Yeah.
So when we communicate with the Fiscal Council, should we also draw their attention to this and get a view?
I must admit, I think, bearing in mind what we're trying to do is, the whole basis behind this is trying to improve openness and transparency and the ability for us to actually understand the information that's brought before us. I think asking the Fiscal Council on the view of 1.4 as well and see if that would be a better way of sweeping it up, I think would be quite a useful ask if we're content. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair. Also, and again, this is my fault, I didn't make it clear. What the department said in response to 1.3 is that, because again, I drafted 1.3, just did the best I could from what members had suggested, that they said that I conflated the minute with this memorandum, that the minute covers some other function. And so what their suggestion and the response was, leave the minute alone, just leave it as it is. But if you want a memorandum, have that. But then they're also saying don't amend in that regard. So does the committee accept that, or are we waiting for feedback from the Fiscal Council?
I think we're waiting for I think, sort of, just looking around the room, but I think we're waiting for the feedback for the Fiscal Council, because that has to be the way we need to do it.
That's good. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, if we move to Amendment 1.5, page 9 to 10 of the table papers, it's the Fiscal Council amendment. As there will be no Fiscal Council legislation in this mandate, an amendment was suggested that would oblige departments to share fiscal information with the Northern Ireland Fiscal Council as it is currently established. The amendment also seeks to give some authority to the Fiscal Council. The Clerk advised that such an amendment will not address the many important governance issues which the committee identified in its report on the Fiscal Council. The Department has provided its view, which is shown on the table. It opposes the amendment. I'm quite surprised that it's opposed the amendment, because what we're trying to do is make sure that the Independent Fiscal Council has the tools that it has to be able to conduct its role. And whereas I'm sure the department will have no difficulties in providing information for the Fiscal Council, but for the whole panoply of other departments and arm's length bodies that it needs to be looking at and reporting on, I'm sort of a bit surprised by that. I think anything we can do to help the better administration, I think it's something we should be actively considering. Any thoughts? Go ahead, Melissa.
Just through the chair, but are we at that point in time that where we should be suggesting that prior to the actual establishment, we'll say, of the Fiscal Council itself?
So Melissa, the Fiscal Council has actually been established.
Yeah, but
it just hasn't been put on statute.
But sorry, for it to be through the Department of Finance to be made official as such, through legislation.
Well, here's the thing, that the Minister has already referred, and indeed the First and Deputy First Minister has already referred to the role of the Independent Fiscal Council. The Fiscal Council is in existence. It is already, and we've already been told that it's going to report back on the budget process that is ongoing at the moment. Now, the fact that it isn't put in statute, I think, is, in some respects, is immaterial, because we know it's already there. But we need to be able to give it the tools so it's capable of doing that, because it will not be, and I think the Minister has indicated that whereas he's willing to bring through legislation to put the Fiscal Council on a statutory basis, it's not going to be this mandate. Whereas this is legislation that's coming through now, and we could be giving the Fiscal Council a lot of assistance to be able to do this and improve the approach that we're taking.
Is it assistance, or would we be actively placing, if anything, maybe an expectation or a limitation on them in their role then?
Again, this is something we could be asking this question. I think if we were content.
Chair, I think I have two reservations about this, and the clerk's alluded to both of them in a side note. The first one is, would this be within the scope of this bill? Would such an amendment be even feasible? And the second one is, if we made such an amendment, could we at all undermine the case for necessary legislation? If we already give the fiscal power this authority to seek and obtain, might some people not then be able to argue, well, then you don't really need any legislation, the Fiscal Council is as it is. It's got the powers you've given it, and might we end up shooting ourselves in the foot over the Fiscal Council?
Good question. Thoughts?
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that point. If you read the departmental response, yeah, it's possibly better leaving it for the next bill.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Okay. So we're informally content not to pursue 1.5 then?
Also, just Chairperson, to remind members that these were obviously talking about committee amendments, and there's nothing to stop members putting down these amendments in their own names, should they so desire.
Okay. Content? Good. Move on to Amendment 1.6, page 10 of the table of papers. Has been suggested by the Department and provides for the explicit inclusion of the Northern Ireland Public Servants Ombudsman in the provision of the bill, i.e. allowing the Department to issue guidance to this organisation regarding estimates. The Department argues that this is necessary owing to the provision of legislation which established NIPSO. Is the committee informally content to support 1.6?
and we're at page 1011 of the table packs.
Yep. Okay, any other views? Okay. Content. So therefore, our members informally content to support clause 1 with the amendment. No, we're not. We're
No,
not there
really,
yet.
we have to wait for feedback.
We'll have to go from there.
Okay.
Move on to clause 2, page 12 of the table papers, amends the Granting Act to change the name of the department from, I think, we confirm we understand clause 2. And as no amendments have been proposed, our members informally content to support clause 2 as drafted. Are we agreed?
Great.
Agreed. Clause 3 sets the commencement date as the day after royal assent. Confirm that members they understand clause 3. As no amendments have been proposed, our members informally content to support clause 3 as drafted. Agreed. Okay. Clause 4 sets out the short title as being the Financial Reporting Departments and Public Bodies Act Northern Ireland 2021. Are we content we understand clause 4?
Great.
Content. As no amendments have been proposed, our members informally content to support clause 4 as drafted. Agreed.
Agreed.
A number of other queries have been made or amendments have been suggested. These are numbered 5.1 to 5.7 from page 13 of table papers. 5.1 refers to the status of the Office of the Attorney General for Northern Ireland. The Department has provided its views, which are shown in the table, in which they indicate that the Attorney General of Northern Ireland Office is not an NDP. Is the committee informally content to not pursue any further action in respect of 5.1?
Yes. Yeah.
5.2 refers to the treatment of Northern Ireland water in the bill. The Department has provided its views, which are shown on the table, and which shows that the status of Northern Ireland water will be dealt with under phase 2 of the review of financial processes. Is the committee informally content to not pursue any further action in respect of 5.2?
Agreed.
Okay. 5.3 refers to the treatment of Nilgosk in the bill. The Department has provided its views, which are shown on the table, and which shows that Nilgosk will be included in the provisions of the bill, although the financing of the local government pension scheme will remain outside the boundary. Is the committee informally content to not pursue any further action in respect of 5.3?
Great.
Great. 5.4 refers to the treatment of the north-south bodies in the bill. The Department has provided its views, which are shown at the table. The Department clarified that the spending of these bodies, which would be allocated into two portions, a Northern Ireland portion and a Republic of Ireland portion, and the former would be covered by the provisions of the bill with no effect on the operation of the north-south body. Is the committee informally content to not pursue any further action in respect of 5.4? Great. 5.5 refers to an amendment put forward by the Northern Ireland Audit Office, including a clause to prohibit designation of a body that is funded from a consolidated fund other than a Northern Ireland Consolidated Fund. Northern Ireland Audit Office contends that while it is welcome that clause 8A brackets 5 requires the Department of Finance to consult with HM Treasury where appropriate before designating a body, similar pieces of legislation in other areas of the UK go further to include clauses that prohibit designation of a body that is funded from another consolidated fund. The Department has provided its views, which are shown in the table. The Department countered that when it consults with Treasury in respect of designation, any double counting issues will be identified and the Department will revoke a designation if required. Is the committee informally content not to pursue any further action in respect to 5.5? Agreed. Okay. 5.6 refers to an amendment put forward by the Northern Ireland Assembly Commission. It suggests that in clause 1 at line 18 on page 2 of the bill, the exemptions which relate to the Northern Ireland Audit Office should also apply to the Assembly Commission. It is argued that the designation process set out in a new section 8A should also be a matter for the Assembly Commission or the Assembly to determine. The Department has provided its views, which are shown on the table. The Department argued that they can safely exempt the Northern Ireland Audit Office from the bill, as other provisions cover the preparation of Northern Ireland Office's accounts and estimates. This is not the case for the Northern Ireland Assembly Commission, and thus it is argued that an exemption for that body is not appropriate or possible. Any thoughts? Okay. Is the committee informally content to not pursue any further action in respect to 5.6? Agreed. 5.7 refers to comments made by the Northern Ireland Further Education Colleges that the new arrangements will require external audits to be undertaken twice. The department has confirmed this and undertaken to consider the materiality of any additional costs. Members, any thoughts? Just to confirm, this is the different reporting periods on the further education colleges that they would have to report at the end of the year and then at the end of the academic year.
Yes.
To do that as well. But my understanding when the department says about materiality of any additional costs, which means that they will pay for the extra, or will go to a way of.
I don't think they've undertaken to pay for it, but their argument is that it's not much.
It's not much.
That it would be tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands, so that it will be an extra cost for the FE colleges to meet.
Okay. Any thoughts? Is
I must have some sympathy with the colleges that, you know, what they do, they're going to have to repeat. But I suppose exempting them is tricky as well.
Any other thoughts? Okay, in that case, is the committee informally content to not pursue any further action in respect of 5.7 other than to seek clarity in writing? Are we agreed? Great, thank you. Do members have any other amendments at this time which they would like to bring forward for committee consideration? Nope. Is the committee content to undertake formal clause-by-clause scrutiny at the meeting on the 10th of November?
And hopefully then we will have a response from the Fiscal Council.
Yeah.
Right to them today.
Yeah, okay. Should that be subject to the Fiscal Council getting back to us?
I'd really like to conclude a formal clause by clause in this, members. It's just that defamation starts on the 3rd of November, and you don't want to cross the streams. You don't want to have both bills running at the same time. It's very bad and should be avoided. So I will try very hard to get an answer out of the Fiscal Council, believe me, before we get to the 10th of November.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you very much indeed for the Ghostbusters analogy as well. Thank you.
Dear God.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed. Can I remove the members, Stephen, can I remove the members from Spotlight and add Rachel and Chris? And next item on the agenda is the financial dashboard update. And if I can, is Rachel and Chris there?
Yes, Chair, we're here.
Okay.
Hello.
Hi, everybody. So the committee will now receive an oral briefing from the Assembly Research on its financial dashboard on executive spending 2021 and 21-22. It's Rachel and Chris, and the Assembly Research paper is at page 133. And who's going to speak? It's going to be Rachel or Chris or both of you?
I'll start, Chair, and then pass over to Rachel.
Okay. Over to you.
Okay, so I'll share my screen first. Okay. So this commentary that you've got in your packs is the third that we presented to the committee, and it builds on two previous ones that we did in November 2020 and February 2021. And it it's accompanied by an update to the financial forecasting dashboard. So we're aware that the department and the committee are keen to improve the transparency of the budgetary and the expenditure information that the department sends. So, we want to make that as easily understood as possible. So the dashboard and the commentary work hopefully feed into that. So our aim here is to present this information in as an accessible and interactive way as possible. So in light of this, we've made some changes to the dashboard to assist with this. So the main difference being that we've now included some functionality that lets us look at the spend profile from various points in the previous year, whereas the last two times we showed it to the committee, it really only gave a view as of the most current data available. So we can now look at what the picture was a few months back or even a year ago. So the commentary in your packs will cover this data in quite a bit of detail. So in the interest of time, what we'll do is talk through some key points from what the data is showing us and use the dashboard to try and help illustrate that. So what I'll do is talk through some of the key points for the data for the full year of 2020-21. And then Rachel will take over and discuss what the data is telling us for the current financial year to date. And what I'll do is look at the monthly and annual picture for capital expenditure, and then do the same for resource expenditure before passing over to Rachel. So the slide that you can see here on the screen, this is a profile of how the capital funding is distributed among departments and spent for the year of 2021. And it's showing here on the right that this is the picture as of March 2021, so the end of the year. We can see our total capital budget here of 1.74 billion. And we can see that Department of Infrastructure had the highest allocation of 588 million, which is around about a third of the total. The other two departments with probably the biggest allocations would have been Health, with around 358 million, and Department for Communities. So Health and Communities accounted for about another third of the capital budget for that year. One thing that stands out here, and which we drew attention to the last two times we looked at this, is the spike at the year end in March. So if I hover over this, and hopefully you can see this, is that in that month alone, there was almost 637 million of the capital budget spent in just in March. So that's about 40% of the year's budget spent in that 1 month. The biggest contributors to that were the Department of Health, with around 158 million, then Infrastructure, Economy, and Communities. This surge that we see in March is something that's featured regularly in the commentaries that we've done for the committee, and indeed in the Assembly and committee discussions, for the reason that there's evidence that it leads to the budget not really being spent very efficiently or delivering good value for money. But as I'll show you in the next slide here, that's not really an unusual trend. So if we look at the annual picture from previous years for the capital budget, you can see here March is basically the same every year. We see this surge in spending. So usually what we've seen here by December in the last 4 financial years, even with only 3 months of the year left, the departments will generally have spent only about half of their budgets by that point. So it's fairly reasonable to assume that this year won't be any different, and we'll see a spike again in March 2021-22. Another feature we can see here is that not only is March the highest spending month, but the actual amount spent has increased each year from 2017 onwards. So obviously the risk of this sort of trend or this sort of pattern in expenditure of the capital budget is that there's a risk that it may be surrendered if it can't be spent, or I suppose that it's just being spent in a very inefficient way. So that looks at the monthly capital profile and the yearly capital profile. So what I will do is switch the monthly resource profile.
Yeah, Chris, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So it's interesting because obviously what we're seeing is this pattern here where sort of the expenditure going out in March. But obviously if there's anything in the procurement cycle or anything that's trying to be done, that's taking place probably 4 to 5 months beforehand. So obviously sometime round about the October monitoring, or sort of wherever the October monitoring round takes place, that's when the decision is made about how much less or more they have for the rest of the year to then to be going through in that sort of expenditure profile. Have we been, does that tie in with sort of, because from all the graphs you've shown us, that trend seems to be exactly the same place roughly every year and has been since sort of at least as long as you've been doing those records. Would that be a sort of a fair assumption to make? Not necessarily about the decision process, but the timing?
Yeah, I would say so, and that would be fair enough to say, and that's sort of why we've tried to show the picture for the same point in the year for the last 3 or 4 years, to show that it's not just, it is quite a consistent trend, and that may be something to do with it. Chair.
Okay, thanks.
Just a quick question, Chris. You see, we obviously, to be fair, the chair's covered it to a degree, the March spikes, as I would call them, and that money being spent. What's the definition of being spent? And I know that sounds a strange way of putting it, but is that money, could that money be spent in January but technically tidied up the paperwork in March? You know my point? So you're coming up to the end of the financial year, so you're going to have this spike, but when is the money actually spent to create that graph in March? You know where I'm coming from?
Yes. So I suppose the definition of it is throughout the year, the department will collate what are called forecasts and outturn data. So it'll basically be a collection of what each of the departments, sort of the 9 ministerial departments and the other non-ministerial ones. So they'll have at each point in the year, each month, they'll have a forecast of what they say they're going to spend in, say, June. And then when it gets to July, there'll be like a backward-looking view of what they actually spent in that month. So there's always a little bit of a lag in what data we get. So we would say we get to January, we might have an idea of what the departments actually spent in December and November. So if we're looking at the March figure here, that is actual spend in March, but received by the departments after March, if that makes sense.
So it's actual expenditure in March.
Yeah, okay.
Correct.
Jim Wells, man.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Jim, sorry.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. Again, the similar trend to previous financial years, I think it's very worrying that departments cannot work through their budgets properly, and we get this mass expenditure in the last part of the financial year. Is there any evidence that rush is leading to poor decision making? Is it simply, are some departments panicking and thinking, oh my heavens, we've got to the end of the financial year, we haven't spent full allocation, if we don't spend it then we hand it back to the central pool and we get criticised and we get a smaller allocation the following year? Has the penny not dropped that better planning is required, particularly on the capital end?
I suppose it's something that it would be worth investigating, not just with the Department of Finance, who essentially they collate the information, but each of the departments separately, as to the rationale, how they've allocated their budgets. I don't know if it's a symptom of having single year budgets or not having a long enough time frame to plan within. I'm not sure, but I think it would be something that would need to be followed up individually with departments rather than just the Department of Finance, for example. But I agree, it's something that's well documented. We've got papers published by Raise as far back as 2013 or 14 documenting examples of this. So,
well, I'm an MLA 27 years today, longer than perhaps any of you were been alive, I suspect. But what I would say is that every one of those 27 years, this has been the issue. Now, my understanding is that they do know what they're getting at the start of the financial year, apart from, of course, from monitoring round money. And secondly, we are told that many of them, particularly Department of Infrastructure, have what's called shovel-ready projects ready to go, which may not be funded in one particular year, and I hope that Ballinhinch Bypass is one of those. But therefore, they have these projects on the shelves, as it were, ready to run if they get an allocation in the incoming financial year. Then it surprises me, if they're that well prepared, there's still this mad dash in the last quarter.
Yeah, I think it's a fair assessment. It seems fairly intuitive that if that large a percentage of a budget that you've got advance notice of what you're getting, that if that large a proportion of it's being spent in the last month, it does sort of seem to say that how it's allocated or how the planning of how it's allocated may need looked at, because it doesn't seem like it would be efficient. We don't see the same thing for the resource budget. So yeah, I agree. I think it's something that should be looked at, and you'd think that with advance notice of the amount that departments are receiving, that it may be there may be a more uniform profile of how the money is actually spent, rather than seeing so much of it backloaded into March.
Yeah, maybe in the next 27 years in this committee, I might propose that we do a bit of research into just how efficient a system this is, because obviously, for instance, we've seen the gross overrun on the OMA school project, and we've seen the debacle of the police college, and I'm just wondering, are some of these decisions that were made rushed towards the end of the financial year, which have come back to haunt us? But that's for another day. And as I say, it is interesting that despite the concern this committee expressed in previous years, we're exactly where we were in every other end of year finance. Thanks.
Okay.
Chair, if I could just add one point there. You know, we're looking at forecast and outturn and forecast outturn, and the departments are forecasting at the very start of the year that these large spikes in expenditure are going to happen at the end of the year. So it's almost, you know, it's not that they're getting to a point and making rush decisions. The decisions made at the start of the year that the forecast is going to show these large spikes in expenditure, particularly for capital, for the end of the year. So I don't know if it's just sort of a mindset. There needs to be some sort of mindset shift because it's hard to say regarding sort of value for money or making rush decisions, because the decisions do seem to happen fairly early in the year.
Yes, but all that is saying is that they're predicting there's going to be a mad dash at the end of the financial year. That doesn't make it right. It just means they're accepting that here we go again. We will have this.
I think they're predicting slippage in capital projects sort of over that winter period.
Okay.
I think, Rachel, I think just looking at sort of the analysis, and again, another excellent piece of work by Ray's, but if you look at the analysis over the years, regardless of the monitoring rounds and the rest of it, it still follows exactly the same shape. So it says something to do about the culture of the process. And I think, you know, one of the questions I think we as a committee will ask is, you know, if we propose to go into multi-year budget, are we going to see a smoothing out process? Or are we still going to see exactly the same shape year in, year out, because that's the culture of the civil service and how they do things? Because I think, you know, the slide you've just put up there is quite clearly, because you look at it, it's, you know, every single, and I'm just looking at the screen, every single year seems to follow the same sort of pattern and same sort of approach. So, you know, one of the things we should be looking at is when we get to multi-year budgets, where's the smoothing out process? And one of the questions we have to ask, because we've now got our procurement board, and bearing in mind we're looking at capital expenditure with our procurement board, you know, what are they doing about trying to smooth out these sort of peaks and troughs? Because it doesn't seem to be a particularly effective way of sort of delivery. But I think that's a series of questions where we're going to expand upon and develop. Okay, and so we're not going to move on to resource, are we, Chris?
That's right, Chair. Yes.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Okay, so in similar to how we've just looked at the capital data, we'll start with the monthly profile and how the resource budget's been spent and distributed among the departments. So of a total resource budget for the financial year 2020-21, just over 15 billion. Unsurprisingly, health has the largest share of that, at around 7 billion. So that's almost half of the entire resource budget. Then the Department of Education accounts for around 2.5 billion, and that's another 17% just between those two departments. So around 2/3 almost between them. Other departments like the Department for the Economy, Justice and Communities each have have allocations of just over 1 billion each as well. And just, you know, following on from the discussion in year-end surges, we can actually see here something similar. Now, around 17% of the resource budget was spent in the month of March last year, or the last financial year, so around 2.5 billion. Now that's less pronounced as a share of the total than it is for capital, but it's still noticeable. And for 6 of the 9 ministerial departments, that was their biggest spending month. The Department of Health spent 1.1 billion of that 2.5 on its own. And other departments, such as the Department for Education, if we look at it, it's much more uniform through the year. It's actually spent most of its highest spending month in June, but not enough that you would call it a spike or anything. So this is quite a uniform trend through the year.
That would tie in with our biggest resource expenditure is obviously in teacher salaries and pensions, so they're paid all the way through. What about agriculture?
Look at agriculture. We'll see a big spike here to do with foreign payments in October. Yeah. So apart from that, again, fairly uniform. Okay. You will see sometimes not with resource, but with capital, you'll see negative values in this. But with capital, that's to do with like disposals of assets, things like that. But we haven't really seen any negatives in the resource spending profile. It's much more uniform through the year. But I'll show you in a moment the annual or the sort of yearly picture of how the resource profile for last year compares with previous years. So although it's fairly common to see a spike in capital spending every single year, it's a bit of an outlier actually for last year. So if we look at the yearly picture for resource, we'll see there's not really any sort of spike in March till 2020-21. So we mentioned that there was 2.4 billion spent in that month, with the Department of Health accounting for just over 1 billion of that on its own. So even if we filtered out the Department of Health to check if that's what was driving the spike, we'd still see that it persisted. And the reason for that is that the Department of Finance, Economy and Communities all spent significantly larger parts of their budget in March than they did in previous Marches. So if we look, for example, at the economy, you can see quite a big spike compared to previous Marches. You should see something similar with finance, yeah. So it's a bit of an outlier actually last year, that surge in March. It's not like a yearly thing that we see every time.
That would tie in with some of the COVID.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's covered the monthly and the yearly pictures, the sort of spend profile for capital and resource for the whole year of 2020-21. The hope would be that that'll help the committee going forward, just in its advisory and scrutiny of how these budgets are being spent through the year and with respect to previous years. So I'm happy to take any questions either now or at the end, because I'm going to pass to Rachel, who will discuss some of the current year-to-date picture that the data is showing us.
Okay. Any other questions for Chris? Nope. Thanks, Chris, as usual. Excellent. Rachel, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chris. And if we could just keep the spotlight on Chris's screen, I'm going to talk through some of the slides as well. I'm going to go through some of the key points from Section 3 of the paper. Section 3 of the paper.
Hold on 1 second, please. Just for information, do we share this information with the Independent Fiscal Council?
And this will all actually go up on the Raise blog, so it's available to the general public. So, but I will, when I'm writing to them, I will
just remind them.
I certainly shall.
Because it'd be useful if they're seeing the same things that we're seeing, so we'd be able to. Okay, thanks. Sorry about that, Rachel.
No problem. So I'm going to go through Section 3 of the paper. Section 3 of the paper looks at the year-to-date position for this financial year, 2021-22. The current update of the dashboard includes the Department of Finance's August 2021 return. Just to recap, the August return, which the committee would have received last month, includes outturn data up until the end of August, and then forecast outturn data for the remainder of the financial year from September through until March 2022. Turning first to capital expenditure, the dashboard shows that the total capital allocation for the year is 1.97 billion, and that at this point in time, the August return includes any changes that would have happened during the monitoring round. So that includes anything that happened during June monitoring of this year. The dashboard shows, with 7 months remaining in the financial year, that the departments have collectively spent 372 million of their capital budgets, and this equates to 18.8% of their allocation for the financial year. Year-to-date expenditure is important because it provides us with some insight into whether there's a realistic expectation that the full allocation will be spent during the year. And the dashboard shows that certainly at this point in time, that all of the departments forecast a year-end expenditure of 100%. This is a forecast year-end surge of more than 0.8 billion for March 2022 across all of the departments for capital. We've been working with the dashboard now for more than a year, so it's possible to compare the August 2021 spend to the August 2020 spend. So in August 2020, the departments had collectively spent 314 million, and that equated to 19.6% of their slightly smaller 1.6 billion annual allocation for that year. And we can actually go one step further than this and look at slide 3 of the dashboard. Slide 3 shows the annual expenditure over sort of the past couple of years. I won't ask Chris to click on all of the bars up until August of each year, but if he did, it would show that in 2017-18, the departments had spent 25.1% of their capital allocations. In 2018-19, this decreased slightly to 22.7%. And then in 19-20, this decreased again to 21.5%. So bearing in mind this year, we're sitting at 18.8%. And so basically what is happening this year so far is not dissimilar to what has happened in previous years in terms of capital expenditure. We can also analyse the year-to-date capital expenditure at the department level. When we do this, we can see that 3 departments report expenditure of more than 20% up until the end of August. So that's the Department for Infrastructure reports expenditure of 27.4%, Agriculture reports 23.6%, and Communities 21.4%. The year-to-date expenditure for the Department for Economy is noteworthy because it sits at negative 10%. A negative capital expenditure can occur when a department disposes of an asset. So, for example, in the case of the Department for the Economy, an expenditure of approximately negative 15 million has been reported for April, and then a further expenditure of negative 21 million has been reported for June. I don't have detail on what those were in relation to. However, it's interesting to note that the year-to-date expenditure for the Department for Economy at the same point in time last year was sitting at around negative 5%. So the dashboard presents forecasting performance data on slide 5. And this is for the month containing the most recent data.
Rachel, just go back there about the Department of Economy. Have we contact maybe the chair of the Department of the Economy Committee just for an explanation into that, because that seems quite.
We'll write to the Department for the Economy and copy in the chair of the.
Sorry about that, Rachel. No, just seemed, bearing in mind particularly this year, you wouldn't have expected to see that.
Yeah.
There.
Okay. So yeah, the dashboard on slide 5 shows forecast accuracy performance, and this particular slide shows the data release for July 2021, and it also has a cumulative forecast for the year to date, but the year to date only actually includes June and July. So the dashboard demonstrates considerable variance in the July 2021 capital forecast accuracy, and forecasting performance ranges from 16.8% to 100%. 3 departments report forecasting variances within 25%, and that's the Department for Infrastructure, that sits at 16.8, the Department for Education at 20.8, and the Department of Justice at 24.1. So bear in mind, the lower the percentage, the more accurate it is. Just as I'd mentioned, the Department for Economy, they report the largest variance of it's 100% because of that negative value. The cumulative figures show a similar trend of sort of considerable variances across the...
Just to interrupt again, I'm sorry, I apologise for this, but just something you said. So actually their forecasting for the first part of the year was out by over 100%?
Their forecasting, this forecasting looks at the last month, so their forecasting of those negative values, it wasn't part of their forecast.
Right.
So it was out by 100%.
So their forecasting was out by, okay.
So there were unexpected expenditures. It should be noted that the forecasting at the start of the year is more difficult than forecasting sort of nearer the end of the year. So the variances sort of at the start of last year as well would have been out. This is just looking at a specific point in time. And it's not clear how much of this variance is due to COVID pressures.
But just to go back again, particularly for some of the departments, I mean, we've had briefed to us the amount of money that came from sort of COVID monies, additional COVID monies, so the sort of the 3.6 billion, and departments had bid for them. So the department's a bid for what they should have expected to be able to do, particularly on things like sort of rates relief support, as small business loan or business loan support. All those sort of things were already, they knew they were coming, and they were covered by the additional COVID monies, because it's been reported to us that the departments have bid for those monies for whatever particular programme they're doing. Yet they're still showing these significant variations.
Yeah, well, as I said, this variance only actually looks at the last month, so I'm not sure how much COVID money would be included in the last month's forecast. So most of that 3.6 billion was obviously for last year.
Okay, go ahead.
Just a question, Rachel. When do they forecast, if you look at the Department of Economy, the 100%, when, yes, they're 100% over, when's that forecast, when did they forecast that? Now we know in July they're 100% over. When did they forecast that period of time?
So the way the forecasting works, this is the June forecast. So they forecast in June that in July they would spend this money, and then we look at it at August, because we're looking at the outturn sort of 2 months after the fact. Because the first return after month end is like due 6 days after month end. So the Department of Finance uses the following month's outturn figure, just to be slightly more fair with expenditure and forecast. So this forecast was made in June for expenditure in July.
Thanks. Thank you.
Okay, carry on, Rachel. Thanks.
Okay, so I'm now going to turn over to resource expenditure, and that's on slide 2 of the dashboard. Slide 2 shows the total resource allocation for the year is 14 billion, and again this includes any changes that would have been made during June monitoring. The dashboard shows that with 7 months remaining in the financial year, the departments have collectively spent 5.5 billion of their resource budgets, and this equates to approximately 39% of their allocation for the financial year. When comparing this to the same point in previous years, in August 2020, for example, the departments had spent 41.1% of their annual allocations. And we can also use slide 4 then to compare this to previous years again. So unlike the year-to-date capital expenditure, year-to-date resource expenditure is pretty constant, and this sits at around the 40% mark every year. We can also analyse year-to-date resource expenditure at the departmental level, and when doing that we can see that 3 of the departments report expenditure of more than 40% at the end of August. So that's the Department of Finance had reported expenditure of 55.8%, the Department of Education had reported 43.9%, and the Department of Health had reported 41.1%. Interesting, agriculture had reported a year-to-date resource expenditure of 16.4%. However, this is similar to what they had reported at this point last year, 15.8%, and that's to do with those farm payments that comes slightly later in the year in October. So all of the departments forecast a year-end resource expenditure of more than 19% of their overall resource allocations. In capital, they had forecast 100%, but I think 2 of the departments had reported slightly less than 100%, but they're all over 99%. And more than 1.5 billion is forecast to be spent in October of 2021 across all of the departments, which is slightly higher than sort of their monthly average. And there also appears to be a small expected surge in expenditure in March of 2022 of 1.3 billion. This was much more pronounced last year in March of 2021. Slide 5 of the dashboard then presents the forecasting performance for the month of July 2021, and then that cumulative performance as well. And we can see some variance in the July 2021 resource forecast accuracy. Forecasting ranges from 1.9%, which is really accurate, up until 48.5%. And 6 of the 9 departments actually report forecast accuracy within 25% of their forecasting figures. The cumulative figures show quite a large variance for the Department of Finance of 300%. However, this was actually due to a June forecast variance of 600%. So this is it taken over then 2 months. So that's pretty much it for capital and resource year to date. So if you have any additional questions, feel free to ask.
Yep. Pat? Okay, Rachel, Chris, as usual, thank you very much indeed, and thank you very much indeed for an informative briefing. Can we share that data with the Independent Fiscal Council?
Yep.
Look at that, and I think also with the Department of Economy and the Economy Committee. Okay, are we content? Okay, thank you very much indeed, team. Thank you. And can I bring all the members back into the spotlight, please? Thanks. Hi, Jim again. Jim and Philip. Excellent. Thanks very much indeed. If we move on to the next item on the agenda, item 8, correspondence. Correspondence index. Members asked to note the index on 17 received items of correspondence from page 157, plus 2 items in the tabled papers. First of all, move on to item 8.2, decapitalisation rates. Members are asked to note at page 160 department correspondence on a planned consultation on possible change to the decapitalisation rate, which affects the method of rates valuation for 12,000 non-domestic properties in Northern Ireland. The consultation will be around a level at which this rate is set and whether this should be prescribed in legislation. Are we content to note? Noted. October monitoring. Members are asked to note at page 162 departmental correspondence confirming that the rates relief of around 11 million, which was repaid by large retailers in 2021, was not lost to the executive. And I think we had that information last week. Are we content to note? Noted. Hard charging. Members are asked to note ministerial correspondence on page 164 explaining why hard charging is not to be taken forward by the department in respect of the NICS office estate. Is the committee content to note?
Content to note.
Okay, so noted. Members are asked to note at page 167 a considerable volume of departmental correspondence relating to consultation on changes to technical guidance in respect of energy efficiency, which will apply to new houses, the nearly zero energy buildings from early in 2022. Page 206 shows the cost of over 150 million over 10 years to the construction sector. Pages 242 to 244 shows the cost for individual new homes and flats are between 2,000 to 6,000 per property, with a further marginal increase for rural homes at page 395. You'll be aware yesterday, one of the things we had in this correspondence and discussions we had beforehand with the department was the issues that we knew that the rules and the guidance and the long-term strategy across this nation was changing. Earlier on this week, you'll notice that the government pushed out a note and pushed out a strategy that will impact on everything from electric vehicles to carbon sequestration to also sort of insulation in homes and the rules about heat pumps. There will obviously be Barnett consequentials and other consequentials that will be coming to Northern Ireland through that sort of change and significant change in strategy, obviously leading up to COP26. I think, bearing in mind that has been the case, and obviously the department will probably be trying to absorb that as well. Are we content to note pending a proper briefing on the feedback of the consultation? Because I think it's a moving feast at the moment, and I think it would be more opposite if we had a chance to absorb both sets of information. Are we content? Okay. Next item, 8.6, pension revaluation. Members asked to note at page 418 departmental correspondence regarding the outworking of a Treasury consultation on the cost cap mechanism and revaluation of public sector pensions. The department advises that Treasury is to bring forward legislation to give effect to changes to future public sector pension revaluations. The changes won't affect the current 2016 revaluation, which is going on at the moment, or the MacLeod remedy. This may lead to further LCM or to a new Department of Finance primary or secondary legislation. The changes are to make the revaluation less susceptible to actuarial shocks. Are we content to note? Jim, do you want to say anything?
No, happy enough.
Okay. Okay, great. Next item is Shared Prosperity Fund. Members asked to note page 420, departmental correspondence regarding the Shared Prosperity Fund. Is the committee content to note? Noted. Next item is procurement and the voluntary and community sector. Members are asked to note at page 421, departmental correspondence regarding new procurement guidance for the voluntary and community sector. The note explains the rules for operating the light touch regime and reserving contracts for voluntary and community sector organisations. Is the committee content to note? Great. Next item on the agenda is the SPADS code. Members are asked to note at page 439 departmental correspondence regarding the Code for Special Advisors. This indicates that SPADs are subject to the NICS disciplinary process, but a decision will be taken at the time of a complaint as to whether the Minister will act as line manager in considering the complaint. In any event, the Minister has final say on any disciplinary action taken against the SPAD. So to get this right, the special advisors are subject to the Northern Ireland Civil Service Disciplinary Code, but the decision as to who takes the decision on it, as I read this correctly, will be down to the Minister. And it's up to the Minister to decide whether the Minister takes the decision whether they discipline the SPAD or it goes through the Northern Ireland Civil Service system. Is that how, am I reading that correctly? Or is it just the Minister decides?
I think the Minister decides. Simple as that.
So,
Sorry,
ahead, Jim.
I'd be surprised if Jim A doesn't want to come in on this one. If he's still out there, but surely the whole purpose of Jim's private members bill was to ensure that SPADs who behaved disgracefully during the RHI, and that's SPADs from several political parties, behaved absolutely disgracefully, and basically were responsible for bringing this institution down for 3 years. If we leave it to the Minister to make this decision, well then all of the disciplinary measures that were included in Jim's bill fall to nothing, because obviously a Minister, if his SPAD has behaved disgracefully, it's in his interest not to take the decision to trigger disciplinary action, regardless of who takes it. So how can this comply with the stipulation of the private members bill?
Jim? Sorry,
Chair, can I say a word? I think there's a distinction arising from the line management of the SPAD. My perception is that because the Minister employs the SPAD, ultimately he determines the outcome in terms of the discipline imposed, but the investigation is under the civil service procedures, and they're subject to the same processes as regular civil servants would be in that regard. I think the distinction is the final line management issue takes it back to the Minister, but I think the investigation is under the civil service procedures.
But Jim, through the chair, if the SPAD has behaved disgracefully, as many did 6-7 years ago, and the recommendation comes back that this guy or lady should no longer be employed, should be hung from the yard arm and driven to the four corners of Northern Ireland, what's to stop the Minister just saying, no, I'm not going to do it?
The ministerial code would be what should stop him.
But how are we going to know any of this? This will all be done.
Well, I think that one of the functions of this committee would be to interrogate those issues if and when it arose.
But how would we even know it had happened? All done behind closed doors, and the guy brought in and said, you behaved disgracefully, but I'm not touching you.
Well, I'm not so sure it'll be as simple as that, because, well, maybe it's a point that the committee should put the department on notice that it would wish to know if any disciplinary proceedings have been instigated against any special advisors going forward.
Jim, Jim Alistair. Of course, one of the things about the NICS disciplinary process is that this disciplinary process would be confidential, wouldn't it, throughout, until such time as a determination has been made. But the determination would then go to the line manager. So even if somebody had breached the special or the ministerial breached the NICS disciplinary code, the fact is that they'd be investigated under the disciplinary process, and then that would be reported to the line manager, who would be the Minister. So actually, it's back to the same way it was. There's been no change. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's not back to the same way it was, because previously they weren't subject to the ministerial code, and therefore the Minister could, with impunity, turn a blind eye to anything they did. And now, because they're subject to the code, if somebody within the civil service, say a permanent secretary, complained about a special advisor, they'd have to be properly investigated under that code.
But Jim, how will we know any of this?
That's why I'm suggesting maybe we should put the department on notice of a standing request that if there is any discipline against any SPAD, we should be advised of that. Any disciplinary process.
Because this could have happened already and we would have known nothing about it.
I suppose we wouldn't know it. We wouldn't know it about any civil servant.
No.
Yeah, but we all know the influence and the role of SPADs and how damaging
Yes,
that can be.
But there could already be a senior civil servant being subject to disciplinary proceedings, and we wouldn't know anything about it.
No, and neither should we until it's actually gone through its process.
Until it's over.
Until it's over. Sorry, Pat, you want to come in there?
I suppose it was taken care of, what was come through, but I'm just looking down through that handbook for the civil service, and special advisors are subject to disciplinary chapter of the handbook. The document applies. The Minister may fulfil a defined role in the procedure, but not as in the handbook, but must not otherwise interfere.
That's the role.
Yeah, the Act says he mustn't interfere.
Yes, but...
The Act's pretty clear on that.
Yeah.
That's on the investigation. It's when we come to the sanction that the problems arise.
Because it's the disciplinary process reports to the line manager, and that's the keys to the wording about the line manager. If the Minister is acting as the line manager, the report goes to the Minister.
Well, that's a valid point. We don't know.
So, therefore, I mean, here's the question we need to ask ourselves, is it right for us to say, rather than named individuals, but if there is a process, should we be kept informed if there is a process that is ongoing? I'm not so sure, because I'm just thinking about sort of normal HR procedures and the rest of it.
Yeah,
that wouldn't be the case.
Mr. Chairman, we're not talking about the groundsman here or a secretary in a department. We're talking about people who can, if they're negligent, cause huge damage to this institution, and have consistently caused huge damage. And the difficulty here is, if you're reluctant, at least we should know that somewhere out there is a SPAD under investigation. We don't have to have the name of him or her, but we at least should know it's happening.
Okay. Thoughts? Keith?
But are we entitled, and this is no disrespect, are we entitled to know?
We should be.
No, but at the point of investigation.
Yeah, I think we should be. Because
But are we allowed to know?
Well, why don't we put it to the department that the committee should be advised of the initiation of any disciplinary proceedings against any SPAD without naming that SPAD, and of any outcome. And if the department say we're not entitled to know, well then let's see the basis upon which they say that.
I think this issue here is that there's a difference between investigation, which I think, as everybody knows, investigations can be done for any reason, can be done nefariously, they can be done for whatever happens to be. But if there is disciplinary proceedings are recommended, that's different, because at that stage we should be informed that a special advisor has been subject to an investigation and sanction or whatever has been recommended. That's a different. I think that's a differing thing we should be kept informed about. Thoughts?
Well, I think we should write and ask. Not only are there any current, but has there any in the past that we don't know about? Since Jim's bill became law. When did your bill become law, Jim?
At the beginning of the year.
Right.
So, just to encapsulate this, so I get this in mind, I think we should write to the department to ask him if any disciplinary proceedings have been instituted against any special advisors in accordance with Jim Allister's, whatever's let down the provision of Jim Allister's bill, and will the department keep this committee informed of anything that's going from the recommendations from a disciplinary inquiry to the ministers for appropriate action? Are we content? I think that encapsulates it.
Yeah.
Happy?
Good.
Okay, thank you. Right, move on to something uncontroversial. The RHI disciplinary process. Members are asked to note at pages 442 and 445 ministerial and departmental correspondence on the RHI disciplinary process. It appears that the Minister is seeking alternative legal advice. Pending there is this, no further responses will be provided by the department. Committee, we've heard from the Interim Permanent Secretary of the Department of Finance that this information is already available. They already know who had been recommended for investigation. They recommend what the recommendations were. We know that. We didn't ask for the names. We just wanted to know on a breakdown of people that had actually been disciplined, whether they'd been given extra training, whether they'd been promoted or whether they'd been demoted. We weren't asking for names. What we wanted to know was how many and what sort of the implications were, because I think this was an important thing that we want to understand from the RHI investigation. I don't see how getting further legal advice for something that the department already has, and we're not asking specifically for names. I can't see how that could be deemed to be. I would particularly. I don't really believe that is an appropriate response from the department, because that's not what we're asking for. What we want to be able to do is say we want to see the quantum so that we can understand what sort of work and roles have been done to try and deal with the RHI issue. Thoughts?
Was that based on?
Go ahead. Sorry, Keith first, and then Jim.
Was that based on the 14 number or 12, wasn't it? Remember the original sort of? Was it 14 or 12 number?
So if you can see at page 446, the list of information that the committee sought from the department. And as the chair has indicated, the Interim Permanent Secretary indicated they had that information. And if you look over the page at 447, I'd offered to the department to chat to me if there was sensitive information they didn't want to release individuals, have a talk to me, and then we could get without the need for further legal advice was my hope. But no, they're taking legal advice, and there'll be nothing further until they get
so that's fairly explanatory. Covers all that,
yeah. I mean, I'm trying to sort of Jim, you want to come in?
I thought the point we were to ask for, or maybe did ask for, was to see cite or to have conveyed to us the findings of the internal and external panels.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Was that included in our letter? I could understand them taking legal advice about that.
It's at page 446. But I think at the time the chair indicated that the committee would accept, well, it would consider information which didn't identify individuals, and that's why I added the paragraph afterwards saying, talk to us. If you're in legal difficulties, then maybe we could have something as an interim, which would give us something to look at without necessarily naming individuals.
And I think, about saying that no further response will be provided because of alternative legal advice. How long is that legal advice going to take? Where's that legal advice coming from? I mean, we had Hugh Wittes with us, who is the departmental solicitor. So who else would we be taking legal advice from? I think there's. I feel this response fills me with more than a degree of disquiet and disappointment. I think we as a committee should be entitled to at least, because we weren't asking for names of people. What we were asking for was, sort of quantums. Who was involved? What was the sort of the process? What was that? We're not asking for individual names to be brought in front of the committee. What we wanted to be able to do is see whether sort of the changes that have been recommended have actually gone through, and what sort of the areas that have been as well. So with your support, sort of, Tim, I think I would like to write back to the Minister re-emphasising our views, and also ask what further alternative legal advice is he seeking, and from where? Because if he's not taking it from the departmental solicitor, who's supposed to be the executive's legal advisor and the department's legal advisor, who's he taking it from? And why? And why would their answer be any different from what the Hugh Wittes would be? Just to put on record, I'm quite disappointed by the response from the Minister on this issue, and I think the committee deserved better, because we did make clear that we didn't want names, but we did want to have some information so we could evaluate what we're trying to do. Okay. Agreed. Okay. Moving on to the next item on the agenda, NICS Injury Benefit Scheme. Members are asked to note at page 448 the ministerial correspondence regarding the consultation on the Northern Ireland Civil Service Injury Benefit Scheme. The Minister asserts that the consultation is at an early stage, and thus no decisions be taken with respect to the treatment of PTSD sufferers. It appears that savings of perhaps 1.2 million may have been identified. Clarification is provided that the transfer of associated costs from ME to Dell was owing to Treasury regulations that specified that such costs couldn't be met from the NI Civil Service Pension Scheme. The Minister also advised that only 37 claimants to this scheme are retired. I find the evidence session that we had on the Northern Ireland Civil Service Injury Benefit Scheme quite troubling. And I don't know about any members of the committee, but I've had some sort of correspondence from various groups, and I will make that available to the committee once I've sort of downloaded it. But I think I'm glad to see that the Minister asserts that it's at an early stage and no decisions have been taken, because I don't think we as a committee could be supporting any of the recommendations that have been made that would be. I don't think we can safely say they were presented to us. I think there was a degree of explanation that was beginning at that stage. But I think, can we put on record that we welcome the fact that the Minister realises that this isn't a particularly well thought out process, and we do need to see sort of a much more properly brought together, thought out process before we're invited to look at that as well. Are we content to write in that respect and also to note?
Yep.
Thank you. Moving on to item 8 to 12, marriage law. Members are asked to note at page 454 departmental correspondence notifying a 12-week consultation of marriage law in respect of adding belief marriage to legislation, i.e. marriage undertaken by a celebrant of a non-religious nature. This is currently undertaken under an interim arrangement. It is also notable that at present an honour system is maintained and no monitoring of marriage fees is undertaken in this jurisdiction. So the first item. The second one is determining views in relation to allowing under 18s to marry or undertake civil partnerships. Under 18s may currently marry but require parental consent. This consultation is prompted by UNCRC concerns in other countries around the rights of young women in forced marriage. UNCRC supports a change to the law to require anybody getting married to be over 18. The Department has not set out a position in this regard. Members, have we anything to say? Are we content to note? Noted. Next item, 8.13, EU Tax Directive. Members are asked to note page 500, correspondence from the House of Lords Committee on the Protocol on a proposed EU Energy Tax Directive. This is similar to the correspondence from the House of Commons Committee considered a few weeks ago. Ministerial response to the EU Tax Directive is page 507. The Minister's response where he indicates that the EU Tax Directive is a matter for the Economy Minister. Is the committee content to note all of the above and pass the correspondence to both the Economy Committee and to the Economy Minister?
Noted.
Noted.
Chair, could I just say I thought the letter from the House of Lords Committee raised a number of very pertinent points to which they haven't got answers.
Yeah.
And certainly I'll be intrigued to see those answers when they come.
Yeah, agreed. Moving on to the next item on the agenda, item 15, LCM on public sector pensions. Members are asked to note at page 510 a response from the Minister in respect of the LCM and public sector pensions. I think we've already covered this in Chair's business and the MacLeod remedy. The LCM debate is on the 1st of November and I will be speaking to that, and is the members content for me to do so? Okay, we're content to note? Agreed. Item 16, Peace Plus. Members asked to note at page 515 a large volume of correspondence setting out the status of the Peace Plus programme. Calls for bids are expected to open early 2022. The correspondence also includes reference to a Victims and Survivors Advocacy Fund of approximately €250 million at page 668. Are we as a committee content to note? Noted. Moving on to item number 17, Income and Expenditure Statement. Members are asked to note at page 797 a response on the role of the Government Accounts Department. Owing to COVID, 170 million was held for emergency use by departments from the 1st of April and wasn't claimed until May. This money had to be deposited and withdrawn every day for around 30 days, hence the 3.1 billion increase in funds placed in investment. One of the things, I know this is probably for more than interest in anything else, but I would be like to sort of write to the department. And first of all, where did they put the money? And how much interest was accrued over this particular period of time? Because so this is, if we're accruing interest to this as well, do we get to keep that interest, and does that go into the consolidated fund? And I think that would just be for part of our overall oversight and also financial education. I would quite like some answers to that, but sort of nothing particularly urgent, but I think it would be a useful thing to understand. Thank you very much indeed. Agreed?
Yep.
Okay. Table number item 18, COVID support COVID support for travel agents. Members are asked to note at page 31 of tabled items a response from the department on COVID support for travel agents. Pat, were you coming in on that one?
Well, it's just that we'd asked for it and they still hadn't come back, but...
Sorry, Keith, you were also on that one as well. Yeah.
Go ahead, Keith.
No, you're right. I just commented.
No, that's fine, that's all right. I'm happy enough with the response. I have a problem here just getting that response up just at the minute there, so I'm just going ahead there, Keith. But it's good that they have come back, but there's no guarantee of any financial help there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what they need and that's what we're asking. Because they're still locked down, they still really haven't opened up yet. It's one of those businesses that have found themselves with very, with no help as it goes forward. I'm sure, like the rest of us, there's estate agents in touch with all of us. You'll have to give me a minute to get the table papers up. I'm just looking.
I know you were waffling there.
You have to give me a minute to get the table papers.
Yeah, page 31 and 32.
I think we discussed that a meeting or two back, Chair, that it was TEO, but my understanding is TEO done one, isn't that correct? The first
Yes.
scheme. I'm not sure if there's a second. I just
There
don't
is
know where
no
that's at.
second.
It's only the first.
First one.
And there was a bit of delay in getting payments out and stuff, but I presume those payments are made, but I don't know if there's going to be a second or...
Yes.
So I'm taking from the correspondence from Department of Finance that they believe it's the Department of Economy is dealing with it. I think it's page 31 of the table papers.
TEO, isn't it? No?
Yeah, it's I think it's both.
It says the Department of Economy will be best placed to advise on any broader support that may be available to the sector.
Oh, sorry. Yes. I apologise at the last paragraph.
They're saying both. They're saying both.
Yeah.
TEO and Department of the Economy. So.
Any broader support? Yes. Additional? Yeah.
Do you want us to write to...
Could we leave that until we just look at it and maybe look at it again next week?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, not next week. You can have a look at it next week. But I'll see the video after.
I know what you mean, yeah.
Okay. Cheers. Okay. Consent. Okay. Item number 19, delegation limits. Members asked on page 33 of tabled items a response from the Department on delegation limits. The Department clarifies that consultancy over 10,000 requires ministerial sign-off and that business case test drilling selections are based on risk factors including previous departmental performance. Are we content to note? Noted. Okay. Commensurate request is at page 832. If we move on to the forward work programme, page 845. Earlier this week, the Assembly agreed to extend the committee stage of the definition bill to 20th of January. Oral evidence session will commence on the 3rd of November with Professor Scott.
Yep.
Good. Excellent. We're going to get him here in person?
Yes.
Good. Excellent. Even better. The committee also earlier agreed to schedule a briefing on accelerated passage for the non-domestic coronavirus valuation bill. As this will make this session very heavy, is the committee content to delay the briefing from NICSHR until the 17th of November and to combine with the head of civil service briefing? I think it'd be quite useful because we'll be able to compare and contrast the two and be able to, I think it will better inform the decision. Are we agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Is the committee also then content to delay indefinitely the briefing on the department's annual report and accounts, which is currently scheduled for the 17th of November? I think we are. Agreed. It's understood that the Minister may be available to brief the committee on the 24th of November on budget matters and major policy issues. Is the committee also content to schedule a briefing from the Minister on in a briefing from the Minister on this date? I think that would be appropriate if we had him on the 24th of November.
Yep.
Excellent. Okay, agreed. The members content with the forward work programme as amended?
Yep.
Agreed. AOB?
Chair, I want to raise a matter.
Yep, go ahead.
There was an answer from the Education Minister which caught my attention in the oral questions this week, in which he told us that the Stroll Integrated College site, or the Stroll multiple site in Oma is now way over budget at 230 million. But the point that really intrigued me was, she said in relation to, I think it's 6 schools, which then are freed up as assets that those assets will remain with their owners, which includes the Education Authority and obviously the trustees of some schools. I really did wonder, why is there not some clawback provision where you're spending 230 million to provide at full public expense new schools? Why is there not some clawback provision in respect of the relinquished sites, which then become assets to those that own them? Is that not an issue that should interest us?
Yes, it is a matter that should interest us, and indeed clawback from any what would be deemed to be sort of surplus sort of executive properties under any circumstances, whether it's civil service buildings or schools or whatever it happens to be. I mean, you would presume that the monies from that would then be used, sold at the best value to be able to come back into the sort of the consolidated fund for further distribution. But I must admit, I can't really comment, Jim, because I didn't hear her reply, and I haven't seen the Hansard in that. But I think if the committee are content, I think we should write to the Department
of Education
and Department of Education, info the Department of Finance, and ask them what is the proposal for returning monies, or what is the most effective and method of disposal of surplus estate, and whether those monies will be returned to the consolidated fund.
I think the issue probably is that some of the schools, probably in the maintained sector, actually are in the ownership of the trustees. But if those schools are getting new premises, why should the trustees be the beneficiaries of retaining the assets, given that it's costing such a phenomenal amount of money?
I think Chairperson, the Committee for Education asked these questions. I think there is clawback, so I'm surprised. I didn't catch education questions, so I didn't hear what the Minister had said. But this question's been asked before, and my understanding was there was going to be clawback of something, even for the schools in the maintained or in the voluntary grammar sector as well.
Yeah.
So I'm surprised by that. So
I don't think she said there wouldn't be clawback. She just didn't deal with the issue, which is what sparked my interest. So I'd like clarification on that. Is there clawback from those private interests as well as the public interests?
And just another matter, is anybody aware whether the Northern Ireland Audit Office is investigating the significant cost overruns on the Stroll campus? Because I think it's gone beyond, it's like a factor of, I mean, it's gone beyond sort of factor of 4.
I think, yeah, they had reported on that previously. That would have been along with casement and others. It was on the list, as I recall, when I was in the Education Committee. So, yes, I will dig out the relevant report and circulate that to members.
Because it seems to have even gone up further than, I think the figures, and I'm trying now to recall, because I remember the figure that the Minister quoted seemed to be in the region of about nearly 60 million more than the last figure that had been reported.
60 something,
Yep. Yeah, 60 million.
On a project that was only supposed to cost about 24 million in the first place, or something like that. I might be wrong. I probably am on this particular issue, but it does seem to me to be significant things. But thank you very much, and Jim. Any other business? This is becoming a habit. And ladies and gentlemen, in that case, we'll reconvene back on here on the 3rd of November in the Senate chamber, and indeed on Starling. Thank you very much indeed, and I hereby adjourn the meeting. The red light.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly.